Hi friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is Deepak and today we are going to learn about Linux boot process. So let's start. Going further we will check out the what is boot process and what happens when when we boot the computer, and what can goes wrong if the boot process got interrupted, and how can we stop the boot process and make the changes and resolve the issues. And the last we will see the summary. So first of all, what is the boot process? Boot process is a thing whenever we restart our computer and the computer starts, and what all the things goes in the background is called the boot process. The first, when we start the computer, the first process which start is BIOS. Once the BIOS is started, it trigger to grub process. When the grub process starts, it triggers to the kernel starts, and the kernel triggers the main init process. The init is the first user space process, and through that each and every program gets started and we get the main login screen. So going further, we will look at each and every aspects in brief. So just here in the diagram I have explained little bit what are the files responsible for each and every process. For the grub, it's boot/grub/grub.conf, which is the responsible file for the grub process. And so again the kernel, after that init, the main file which is triggered when the init process starts is /etc/init, and through init this file each and every other files get triggered, which we are going to learn further in this tutorial. So first, the BIOS process start. First of what is BIOS? BIOS is basic input and output system. It's the main thing of the BIOS is to initialize the hardware and make the system to know from where the system has to boot from. Like if the system has to boot from hard drive, so it will just select the hard drive and it boots from the hard drive. The BIOS is same in both the Windows and Linux. Second, what may goes wrong if the BIOS doesn't work? First of all, the BIOS setting would be wrong or incorrect. Means something in the settings, if we have to make something wrong, so BIOS would not work. And second is bad boot device ordering. Like we have to boot it from the hard drive and we have selected the pen drive, so it would the BIOS would not work. Or if the first boot system is hard drive and we have selected a floppy drive, then definitely the boot ordering is wrong. So we have to make sure if something goes wrong, how to make it correct. So once the BIOS started, how to interrupt or influence the BIOS? First, it's depend upon it's a vendor specific key. If we have a Dell, we can press on F8, or most probably or it comes with F12. When you press F12, when the Windows computer boots up, the BIOS get interrupted. Once the BIOS process is finished, it trigger to the grub process. Grub is Grand Unified Bootloader. It select and start the operating system. Okay, and what all thing happens when the grub process start? First is initialize the RAM, it loads the kernel, and to kernel to execute some programs, it provides the command line to the kernel. What all thing may go wrong while the grub process starts? First is the configuration of the bootloader would be wrong. The RAM may be corrupted, or the image of the RAM or kernel would be corrupted. Second, the command line which is provided by the grub would be corrupted. This thing can goes wrong. Now, how to influence the grub process? First of all, we can click E or A when the system boots. When we can click on E or A to interrupt the grub process. And once it is interrupted, we can start the process with in the single user mode or in slash bin slash bash mode. When the grub process is cleared successfully, it triggers to the kernel process. First of all, what is a kernel? A Linux kernel is a heart of the operating system. It is responsible for managing the hardware access for the user space process. Like when we click on K, the operating system should print K. This happens only to the kernel because of kernel. And what all thing happens when the kernel process goes is, first it detect the hardware. What all hardware does the computer process? It detect it. Second, it loads the drivers for that process. But at the time of boot process, how does the kernel get the drivers for the drive devices? It gets the drivers from the /boot /grub/grub.conf. In that, it is the destination of the process, the drivers is mentioned, as you can see. Second, it mounts the root file system in read only and initialize the init process. What may go wrong in the kernel process? First, the RAM may be corrupted. Second, the root file system would not be identified, or it might be corrupted. So once we goes in the problem in the kernel process, how it can be interrupted? It can only be interrupted at the time of grub process. The next process is init and upstart. This is the main process, the end process which happen. Well, this is the first internet interface process started on the machine. Is /bin/init process, and this is the process which is responsible for starting all the remaining user space program directly or indirectly. What will thing happen when this process start? First is the kernel start running init process, and the init program is responsible for completing the boot process by starting all other non-kernel system process, because the kernel system process are started at the kernel level, but what about the non-kernel process? It gets started over here. And when the init process start, it triggers the jobs. What all jobs are running, it trigger to that process at the time of boot, where when we start any job is triggered, it start from here. And even it start the run level, on which run level we have to start it. Again, at the boot, the startup event causes init to run /etc/init/rcs.conf job, which is responsible to run the following process. First, it's open rc.sys init process file, which is responsible for LVM, which checks the LVM file system where it is mounted, and it mount it. Second, it look for init tab file to find which run level we have to start the computer. Is it 0, 1 or 4, 2, 3 or 5? Second, once it got the run level, it's enter the run level and it trigger the run level and open it. Second, the run level event causes init to run the /etc/init/rc.conf job, which runs rc script, which is a desired run level as an argument, whether we have to start the process or stop the process. Whenever we can, we can see when we start the service, and after that we use chk config on. So which services to start or services to stop, it depends upon what we have used at check config, whether it is on or off. I have written one note, like older version of RHEL, Red Hat Linux had somewhat different implementation of init process, which work little bit differently. So what may go wrong at this process? If it, first of all, the fs tab, the entry of the file system might be wrong, or the crypt tab, the encryption of the file system which is done, it might be wrong. First, the second is a network or a service mean configuration. It may hang the service with all the service which you have installed. This might be misconfigured, so it may start. There are many more at this time of process. As in it process, there are many more things which may cause the may cause the errors. So I have mentioned some of it. So how to interrupt INIT process? First is press Alt Tab from the graphical environment to view what are the error messages we have got at INIT process, and we can press capital I during the service startup to select the service interactively to check the service which are wrong, and select interactively to resolve that errors. So let's see what all thing we have learned. First is BIOS, just an overview of firmware that runs at power on. It's when we power on the computer, the first thing which runs. Grub is loaded from the boot device that determine the operating system core executable to root. This process determines the operating systems. Kernel, the operating system executable responsible coordinating software access to hardware. This is the process as we talked in this tutorial as well as in the first tutorials of Linux for beginners. INIT process, the final process. This is the first Linux process started, ultimately starts all other process. Thank you for watching this video, and if you like this video, please subscribe my channel, and if you have any question in your mind, you can comment on that. And thank you very much.